Lauren, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I'm really excited to go over what you have to deliver. But first, I just wanted to start with why is branding so important for a business?
Mm. So thanks, Joshua, for working with me on this project. It's been wonderful to collaborate. And branding's important for a number of different reasons. I personally like to think of it as the architecture of a business. It's really where your customers get a look and feel, and essentially they get to understand the personality of your business. So it's sort of a first impression, and then once that branding is repeated, say the logo, the voice, the style, the more that's repeated, the more it builds trust for your users and customers. So yeah, I really like to think of it as the structure of the business. It's where customers, wherever they are, they don't need to be coming to your brick and mortar store, but it's this sort of virtual way of helping them feel secure that you are an established business, and it gives them a feel for who your voice is. Yeah.
That sounds really nice. And I'm wondering when's the best time to come up with that uh, in the like birth of the business. From
Mm,
starting several businesses myself, you have an idea, you test it, other people validate that good idea, and then you start building the structure or creating a product, and then it's time to take it to the market, so to speak.
hmm.
And that's typically when branding first comes introduced to a business owner or somebody with an idea.
Yeah.
When really should it be designed?
It's interesting because I have noticed with multiple businesses being the designer that branding will often be this point of paralysis for business owners. They have the idea, it feels really strong, they have so many of the elements in place, and then branding freezes them. And so, what I'd say to answer your question, what you really want to do is start with an internal to external model. So as soon as you have your core values as a business, I think that's when the branding should start. It's great to sort of narrow it down to maybe 3 to 4 core values that you want to focus in on. So mission statement, vision statement, core values, that's essentially your branding that's building from the inside out. And then another tip I would say on that note is just to remember for businesses, because maybe there are a number of businesses out there that don't come from a design background, but really to hold on to branding consistently changes, even with Fortune 100 companies. They are constantly iterating and updating their branding. So as a business is new and trying to birth into the world, I would say go ahead, create something that feels correct in that moment. Spend the time and resources to align it with your mission, vision statement, and core values. Bring that out into the world, also feeling reassured that at any moment you can refine that and keep adjusting. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that thought of that. It's something that you would go hand in hand as your business develops. Your
Yeah.
branding would also develop. So you wouldn't necessarily like get somebody to do that for you, and then it's a static thing. It,
Yeah.
it would continuously grow with the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's sort of where I come at design, the angle I approach design with. I'm a UX designer, and so what that means is user experience designer. And so you're constantly putting humanity or your user at the core of any design problem, idea, etc. And so as we evolve as humans, so too will the branding evolve. So really just to think of it as this constantly refining impression of who you are in the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
From developing my own business, that's a lot to keep track of when you're trying to start something and
Yeah.
get something up and running. And I remember with your help with my first endeavor, getting a logo made, and then you really got to like sit with it and let your business grow and develop. And I remember saying like, all right, I'm just gonna like not think about it for a year and then be able to like come back, look at how much I've grown, because
Yeah.
typically you're so close to the runway trying to get your business off the ground that you have no time to look up and consider your values.
Yeah. And that's where it's really helpful to have a designer or sort of a mediator, if you will, to
Hmm.
come in and help you decipher what it is you're trying to say. I often think of designers as interpreters of visual communication. So for the person who's creating the business, you're holding so much more than just the brand voice. And so having a specialist come in, help you translate that, simplify it, put it into visual communication, and then obviously it relieves a lot of extra runway space for the business owner.
Yeah, I know this. I know this firsthand. I know I said this analogy last time, but when I'm building a website or building anything for marketing purposes, I just need to know what color to use. Not not letting me choose the myriad of different choices of colors for a brand. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate designers and what they do, and they really are able to sit with the brand and get a good clear look at where things stand and how that visually represents them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fantastic process being able to really dig into what the business owner is trying to say and almost looking beyond the words to drop into that sort of core value and then help them understand why they're making the choices that they are. So, yeah,
Mm.
it's a great collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, how did you get interested in this, and how did you become to work on your own?
Hmm. Um, so I would say I was one of those little kids that always wanted to be an artist, and alongside that, my other dream was to be a treasure hunter. And I sort of see design as the adult version of both of those two things, where I'm constantly sort of mining for what it is that somebody's really trying to say with their brand voice. And I'm able to bring in that level of creativity that's solving the problems at a core level. So
Mm.
maybe it was in my genes all along, but it's certainly been a discovery process for me. And I've had my own design agency now for 5.5 years, and I can definitely say along with the industry, it's changing all the time, and so I'm moving with that. And with each new project, I feel like I grow, and it's really about creative problem solving, um, and then just that innate ability and excitement around looking for patterns and creating them and interpreting the wider vision and simplifying for the client. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm. Can you describe for the autonomy class where people are looking to become freelancers or getting into um, have new modern skills? Can you talk about a little bit of the progression of your professional timeline on?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe there's two ways that I could approach that question. I've had my own design agency studio for the last 5.5 years, and even within that time, it's changed rapidly. I started with almost more print design, branding. That's quickly moved to digital, and that's sort of majority of the design world now is digital products, apps, websites, etc. And I've in the last year converted to user experience design, and there's a huge wave towards that. I think definitely the recognition of we're here to solve problems for humans and not let technology run away with itself. So that's to me, that's a really important voice within the design world. So anyone that was thinking about freelance or stepping into design, I would say at this point, focus in on digital design. Products are really going to, just keep growing and morphing. And then as a UX designer, I'm definitely here to champion empathy and growing humanity and collaboration within that world. So I would also say pay attention to user experience design. It's a really exciting field and it's not going anywhere soon. So invest some time in researching both of those arenas. Yeah.
And is that what you just described as going from just print and like physical posters to digital art and graphics, and then user design is when a user enters into a space, a website, what they encounter and how they engage with what they encounter? Is that user design?
Yeah, so it's also sometimes called human-centered design. So it's really removing the assumptions that the designer or business owner might come in with of, hey, I want to use blue as the brand color, and I want to put this button, this call to action button here because I assume that's where most people would go. Whereas user experience or human-centered design, we're actually testing that out in the world. So sometimes it's really just testing a website, watching a user to see where they naturally travel in a product or in a space. And so really observing to make sure that we are creating the most effective, efficient products out there, and it really suits the user's needs. It meets those needs. And then beyond that, there's a lot of emphasis on design research, which is part of user experience design. It's sort of a third of it. And that can be digging for core issues. So it's not just sort of visual hierarchy of where something is placed on the page. It can be how might we build a user's trust in this situation. And so really sort of looking for core themes of improving the user experience.
Very cool. Can you share any tools that you do to accomplish that? Like how do you watch the visitors that go to the website to test?
There are an abundance of tools out there right now, and it's at this interesting sort of morphing phase where there's so many different companies offering different things. But as far as tools that anyone sort of approaching the industry would want to get to know, industry standard tools. So Sketch is used a lot for prototyping. So that's just sort of putting together rough ideas for how this app might work, or what it might look like. And then you can start to build from what they call low fidelity, where it can even just be sort of pencil sketches of the pages and how they flow together, to high fidelity markups where it's sort of like, this is exactly what you want it to look like. And that then gets handed over to the developer. So Sketch is the one tool that I would say industry standard. It's great. Adobe has their own product called XD, but Sketch is probably more widely used. And then InVision is also industry standard, and that's really where you're lacing your prototype together. So you'll have hotspots where call to actions will actually take you to a certain page, and you can see how everything flows together.
Oh, cool.
So you can test it as a model out in the world before
Before.
you actually launch it. So
Very
those
cool.
those are the two main tools I'd focus on.
Great. I haven't heard of any of those. I'll check them out. I
Yeah.
have used a tool called Crazy Egg, and that's heat
Yes.
mapping.
Yeah.
So you get to at least see where people are clicking on your website to make some
Yeah.
choices from that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's very helpful as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Lauren, we had you put together a styling guide and a mood board for Autonomy just because I was really struggling with trying to um, create multiple websites and just having something that I could use in order to build that framework with. I was I reached out to you and asked if you would help us out, and you put together a styling guide. You want to go ahead and walk through that? And
Yeah. So what I'll say with regards to a style guide, it functions many purposes. As mentioned, I think of branding as sort of the architecture of a business, and um, branding is something you want to repeat as frequently as possible to keep building the user's trust. It's something that they visually start to recognize, and then that sort of builds this connection between the brand and the users. Um, so, what you want to make sure of is any sort of logo. Here you can see I'm flashing across. So, you'll have an icon, which, it can appear in sort of smaller situations. So, maybe at the top left of a page where you don't necessarily have space for the full branding. So the icon is really helpful. The full logo is what you'll want to use as frequently as possible. And then in this situation, Autonomy had these two emblem logos that will be used as well. And then, so you have your primary logo, again, that's used as frequently as possible. These are the two secondary logos. And then in situations where you can't necessarily use one of these colors, they say that color is relative. So, of course, if you had a navy or gold background, you'd need something that visually separated and stood out enough. So, hence primary, secondary, tertiary logos. And then this just visually showing what the logo would look like on a dark background. Your designer might not always be available, so having this brand style guide quickly tells anyone in your company what they should be designing for or how they should be using these elements to create a successful design. Then here again, so your two primary colors, what we wanted to speak to with that was answering to your core values of integrity, discovery, and excellence. Blue is often used in the design world as this sort of, it's a really good way to reassure users that this is something safe and solid and is something that you can trust. It's often used in sort of more, I'd say, more corporate fashion. And then the gold as well, just letting users know that, again, it's something that they can trust, and it has this sort of sheen quality about it. And then we wanted to come up with some secondary colors because, as you mentioned, there are these offshoots of the main brand. So these would be your secondary colors where you're using them for call to actions and little highlights, visual highlights, And then this is another offshoot of your main brand, the Autonomy Unlimited. So you want to distinguish between those two and use these different secondary colors. What you're seeing here with the little numbers, it's called the hex number. And that just helps anyone that's designing some of your products know that they're using the exact correct color, whatever they're designing. So you get this uniformity. And again, it's a way to build trust with your users. These two sections over here, they speak to a visual application that you can use on top of images. So with the transparency example, you might want to have your white logo punching out at the top, and then an image sort of showing through as it becomes more transparent at the bottom. So these are just visual treatments that you can use with images to make it a little bit more interesting, and again, creating that consistency. So call to action button is really important, because that's sort of your turnkey with any product. That's where you tell your users, this is where I want you to go. And so we chose these blues that have a little bit more of a fresh autonomy feeling to them, where it's encouraging, it's still stabilizing, and yet it feels sort of new and a little bit more punchy, but it's not too extreme. So again, differentiating between the two offshoots of the brand and just creating that brand voice of consistency. Another thing that you definitely want to include in a style guide is exactly what font it is and how you would treat your headers and your body. In, I'd say, modern / contemporary businesses, it's very common to either use the same font for headers and body, or to only have two, because as you can see over here, fonts will have so many different weights and treatments that you can get a lot of variety even within one font. And again, the more you're repeating yourself with any sort of brand assets, the more quickly the users are building that trust. So if you suddenly have 10 different fonts, it's quite visually confusing. So really simplification, keeping things really clean, that will assist you in your branding.
And those different weights,
Yeah.
they help the reader, right? So
Yes.
when they're looking at a big page of text,
Yeah.
it breaks it up, and like quotes, people kind of know it, like they know italics are quotes. So
Yeah.
it kind of helps them assist with deciphering what's on the page, right?
Exactly. So if you had an entire page that was all just this Montserrat body, it would be very, again, you want to think of it as how can your users' eyes quickly decipher where they're trying to go. And so having different weights, introducing color, that'll sort of quickly guide them to what is most visually important for them, what's the message that they need to glean as quickly as possible, so that they don't need to read tons and tons of text to try and decipher where they're going. And the cleaner and clearer your design is, the less it'll create eye fatigue. And again, just sort of making sure that you're capturing your audience in the right way. So yes, these font weights are important. And as you can see, I've shown all the different font weights, but then just parenthesize the ones that you will use most frequently, so that again, you're creating that consistency.
That's great. Thanks.
The mood board is something I like to include in a style guide. So there's a great website called Unsplash, and they offer free stock photography, and you can go ahead and use their imagery for a small credit. And I appreciate them from a really sort of fresh feel. They're breaking the mold as far as what stock photography has looked like and the way it operates in the past. So speaking to your brand, again, where it's this really sort of novel concept and idea, and then supporting other brands like that. So a lot of these images come from them. And what I like to try and convey in a mood board is really sort of the look and feel of where you're going. So perhaps you don't use all of these images in your branding, but it just helps for if somebody else in the company is designing something and your designer's not always available, they know visually what to look for if they're looking for stock photography. And so again, your core values here, the top line is really some of the brand images that you'd already deciphered. And then what I wanted to build from there was sort of this voice of novel and fresh, and creating something that people really find meaning with what it is that they're trying to create in the world. So some of that speaks to working in outdoor spaces, breaking the traditional office mold of what does work look like. So, for instance, changing your environment completely, being able to be creative and innovative wherever you go. And we also spoke about some of those core values being collaboration and community. So also sort of bringing in that level of freedom and delight. And I've added these just to sort of add to the brand voice and continue that track of really this is trying what we're trying to point to as the style guide and where you're going. So those are the main elements I would provide in a style guide. Of course, you can build it to a much further extent, but that's a overview of, as a basic model, that is definitely what I would deliver to any business that I was creating some branding for.
Well, I find it extremely helpful. Just one location to run back and grab the color codes is helpful, because I'm constantly searching all over the place to get a match.
Yeah.
So just having that one location to be able to do so. And so now that you're delivering this to the client, us, how I'll make use of that is taking it and giving it to our social media manager. And so she now has firm out guidelines on what images to grab, what overlays to use, the logos, and which ones to use when, according to like the darkness of the photo or the lightness of the photo. I really like the values, and because that will essentially turn into copy. That will help guide the copywriters into conveying the message with the text.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful also with the different weights, because we're going to be writing blogs on our website and inviting guest bloggers to write on our website. So now we have a guideline to tell them which weights to use with the font throughout the page. And so it all becomes more unified as a whole website.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're speaking to. Is it's really this touchstone that the myriad of people that are going to continue your brand voice can keep coming back and making sure that there is that consistency and you have your bases covered wherever you go with the branding. And as you continue to grow, there's always that touchstone that helps you feel secure, helps your users, build the trust. So, yeah.
And there was one more layer of complexity with kind of multiple brands under the Autonomy brand, where we have Autonomy or getautonomy.info, which is our sales page, which is where people go they're directed to in order to get into the course. And now we're also starting Autonomy Unlimited, which is the marketing extension of Autonomy, where we'll be able to provide services to businesses and projects. And we wanted those both to be recognizable, as in they belong to each other, but still unique enough to be different enough to be unique.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that was, I appreciate a little bit of complexity. um, and it was a fun approach to, again, here are your primary colors. You want those splashed as far and wide as you can, and then also how do you communicate that there's something different going on here and to pay attention. So those sort of more flashy blues come into play and speak to that. So yeah.
Well, really exciting. I'm ready to put this to work. I have 2 websites ready to be built, and I was just waiting for this key component because as I did prior to this, I built a website, presented it to the client, and it wasn't what they envisioned. So all that work really was wasted, where I knew I needed to go back to the foundation, get my branding straight, get the colors correct in order to build the vision for the client. So Lauren, thank you so much for your help and your expertise on this. I love working with you. Where can people find you to look for help with their businesses themselves?
Yeah. So anyone's welcome to pop onto my website that tells the story pretty accurately. So it's twaterdesigns.com, TEA water designs with an S.com. And you'll find my contact page there if needed. I'm happy to answer questions. I know what it's like entering the scene as a freelancer and someone who started my own business. So if anyone needs to ask questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And also, always a pleasure working with you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Sounds great.